back to another episode here on the Gundams. This time we're talking about the origins. Last time we went more in depth on Tomino and what led him to the godhood of Gundam, and we talked about some of the old school toys, some of the other stuff. So we're starting our series with the canon universe, or the UC universe, and we're starting all the way at the beginning with Gundam Origins. Origins talks about the origins of young Char. So tell me about him. Who's he? Now that we're talking about his origin story, who is this guy?
Char is probably most significantly the most important character in the whole Gundam mythos. Not only does his existence pretty much spawn a whole generation of Char clones through all the series that came after, and Sosetsuru and alternative series, but he was always a very extremely interesting character, mostly because of how he would continuously change his perspective during the 1 Year War, during the Griff's War afterwards, and even the Second Neon War.
So while we're on the subject of talking about wars and factions and stuff, I'm going to show you the Federation flag for a moment. And up to the point of origins, tell me about the Federation. Who are they in the point that we are of the timeline of origins?
And the point of origins, Federation is still a fairly old organization. They have existed for quite a long time at that point in time. And it's kind of a development, not so much as the UN, like we would have here, as in it works like a complete government of the Earth.
Okay.
But it leaves autonomy to a lot of sub-military sections, such as having the North America FE group and other paramilitary groups that have autonomy to act as they wish, but at the same time are part of the Federation. A lot of this kind of like atomic groups were the cause of many problems for the Federation. One of the biggest problems they had was when the Titans came to be, because of how they let that shit go for a while.
Correct. But that's further down in the timeline, not at the moment.
Yes. But it is a thing that has always been an ever-etching problem for the Federation, and I don't think even after the Titans it was ever fixed.
Right.
But it's also the cause of a lot of improvement in the Federation, because of how every military leader kind of fought to have like more importance than each other, and eventually led to a lot of them working on their own projects and such forth. That's how we got so many Gundam prototypes at the time of the 1 Year War.
Bring up here the Zeon flag. Tell me about Zeon during the point of origins, and who
now,
are they?
There's going to be like 95 people who are going to immediately notice that it looks very similar to a certain friendly German flag.
Right?
And that is not only by design by Tomio, because he wanted to put a very similar threat to this world, but it's also heavily influenced by Giren Savi, the oldest son of the Savi family. Giren Savi with the white hair. Giren Savi was very, very heavily influenced by Nazi ideology when it involved that it was quite one of those things where he looked at what Sendaiku had talked about how space noids were new types and they were evolving humans, and he took it literal. And then he took it in the same way that early Nazis and people in Germany did when it came to their own like super radical nationalism and white supremacy kind of thing, but I guess instead it would be like space supremacy.
Right.
So this cost because he was pretty much the figurehead of the Savvy family. Besides Doso, who was kind of like the military head of the Savvy family, they were always not necessarily, but kind of butting heads because one was like the youngest oldest brother, and the other one was like the older brother, and they both kind of had their own ideas of where the family moral compass should be.
Right.
The one that was kind of more of a bridge between the entire Savvy family was definitely Saroso Savvy, which he unfortunately he's not in the picture. He died during the events of Origin. He was actually the brother that got caught off in the car bomb.
Right.
And, yeah. And he was a master of political intrigue. He rivaled his father when it came to that. And the thing was that his father at the time, at that point, was kind of basically retired. He was just chairman of the group, where he himself was able to really put a political dent that would lead to the Savvy family taking control of pretty much the Principality of Zeon.
Right.
Or what became of it.
Right, so I'm going to bring up Anaheim Electronics, and who were they during Origins?
Anaheim Electronics had been a company that was developing ships, suits, and pretty much anything else that was needed for mining and military use. At the time, they had a contract with the Federation, but that was kind of like just a sell us stuff cheaper contract. Because really, at the time, the Federation was in the kind of mindset of like, yeah, we have enough ships to crush a goddamn moon, but why do we need them? We don't have any adversaries. Why do we even care? Most of the time that we have a military, we're just putting down small guerrilla groups in Earth or other stuff. Because in Earth at the time, there was happening a lot of small pops of cities all around the world that were kind of being like, hey, we don't really like how you're running the country or the world or whatever. Right. We want to separate ourselves from it. And we'll go more in depth in that when we go cover the first show and we go to 8MS theme and all that stuff.
Right. So speaking of wanting to separate themselves and, declare independence and stuff, tell me about Zeon Zum Deikun. Who was he?
Zeon Zum Deikun was an idealist. He was at the time the leader of coordination of 3 different colonies that became the Principality of Zeon. Basically, he for a while was proposing that the best way to deal with how the colonies were feeling and how everything was acting, like because there was always this giant tension between the colonists and the people from the Federation who were coming in and being like, look, you're basically should be super happy that we leave you live here in peace, okay? If it was up to us, we could just enslave you, and it would be fine.
Right.
And that was a very misguided mentality that a lot of Federation head honchos had about the colonies. Mostly because of years of them understanding that the colonies only survived by maintenance of the Earth, which was extremely misguided at the time. They were born through that, and they lived through that, but they hadn't realized how self-sufficient the colonies had become.
Right.
And them feeling like they were supporting these people, and at the time, you also got to understand that the Federation allowed these programs to exist and let so many people just flow into space, not because they wanted like some kind of like space exploration or anything like that. It's because of necessity. As soon as the Federation got to a certain point, they realized that the Earth population was to an extreme, and they couldn't maintain it. So they had to let people in space. And at first, to tell you the truth, the Federation was just expecting they were all going to die. They just thought this is an easy way to get them to commit suicide and fuck it. At least they deals with some of the people on Earth.
Right.
But then after they saw the colony building worked and how everybody was taking it, they realized, yeah, let's just build more colonies and stuff like that, which was, at the end, one of their biggest downfall because there was so many colonies in space that when Zeon became a thing and a lot of them joined Zeon either by force or because of ideology, it actually became a threat to Earth. If it was just like 5 or 6 colonies, yeah, that's problematic, but that's not really a threat. But when you're talking about 30 or 40 colonies, you have a problem.
Right, correct.
But to be fair, Zeon's main power wasn't numbers. It was technological superiority. But again, we'll get to that.
Right. Char's sister as a child. Tell me about her and her importance in Origins.
Sailor Mars, she had a very hard childhood, which is very unique because unlike Char, that really broke down and kind of like built this very tough exterior to life because of it, she, to a certain extent, still kept a lot of her hope and kindness towards humanity.
Right.
There's a lot of reasons why she should hate the Federation, and there was also a lot of reasons why she should hate Zeon.
Correct.
But throughout her journey, especially through the original Gundam series, you get to see that she's willing to adapt only because the only thing she really cares about through the whole time is finding out if her brother's still alive. Because she wanted to have the family connection even if he didn't.
Correct. She explains somewhere along the way that everyone in her family tends to either disappear or abandon her. So I believe her purpose in Origins was looking for her brother. Even if he didn't want nothing to do with her, like you said, she wanted to know that somebody in her family was still there, even if it was from a distance.
I like to think that a lot of people say that Char didn't really care for her a lot because of how he was really able to just leave her behind. But I feel like in his own way, Char did it because he knew his life was fucked.
Yeah, like he wanted to protect her from everything that he was willing to do, knowing fully that if she was with him, he wouldn't be able to accomplish his goals, and that he wouldn't want her to witness the atrocities that he would commit for the sake of his goals.
Yeah. Especially later on in life and then so on. I mean, he had many opportunities to meet up with her again, but... Right.
And so, here's Dr. Minosky. Tell me about him.
Dr. Minosky was ahead of development for mobile suits for the AE, and at the time, pretty much, the government was like, why do we need more mobile suits? We have the gun tanks and we really need them. And, yeah, because of Minosky particles, spaceship warfare had become more of a problem. But we have the basic RX 70 and
what
RX
are
80.
Particles? Sorry for pausing you for a moment.
Minosky particles are kind of like, think of it as an EMP grenade, where it causes this kind of like powder to disturb electronic devices.
Right.
It was the same thing, but it became more of a nuisance because, one, it wasn't necessarily limited. It could be spread as much as it wanted because it was a byproduct of the engines inside of the ships or mobile suits. And it was just really easy to pretty much blind everybody in the area by using it.
Right.
Especially if you have multiple ships. If it was one ship, you can do so much with it. Right. But if it was multiple ships, then what you can do is basically hide the number of ships you're dealing with. And that's a big problem in warfare. Again, this wasn't such a big issue for the Federation because they kept saying, who's opposing us? There's no problem. Even if the colonies grow balls and decide to attack us, they're not going to be able to do much damage. And that's why they grew complacent.
Correct.
At the time, they didn't have that many, actually, Anaheim Electronics. Because they didn't have that many ties with them, they didn't really care. Like, I mean, they did care a bit. That Minosky disappeared for a couple of years. But they were like, we'll let Anaheim Electronic deal with it. You know, we don't really need anything from them, right?
Right. Speaking of Anaheim Electronics and speaking of Dr. Minosky, tell me about him. Tell me about Tim Ray.
Tim Ray is basically one of the students of Minosky at the time. he was very adamant that we should research into the next advancement into mobile suits because he saw what Minovsky was able to develop but wasn't allowed to because there just wasn't the need. There was no need for RX-70 improvements. They were basic gun cannons that could do what they needed to do, and that's it. They didn't need anything special. But their mobility was very limited. He saw that as a problem, and he saw that Minovsky had a solution, or at least was working on a solution. But they didn't give him any funding to deal with it. So the second the Savvy family got him, and they pretty much told him, hey, you need to make us something that's incredible, because they had mobile workers at the time that had tremendous force and movement capability, but they were stuck to power sources in order to maintain that. Minovsky's solution to that was creating a basic nuclear engine that was small enough to fit into a mobile suit and, be able to do everything they needed for a mobile suit.
Correct, which eventually led to
the development of the Saku 1.
Yes, and eventually things like this.
The Saku 2 commander type, specifically this one, is ironically a very outdated model just from the simple fact that it was one of the first production line ones. I believe Char's Saku 2 was actually a recycle of the Saku 1.
Right.
That he used. He did it because he got very comfortable with his Saku. It was one of his staples, which ironically wasn't something that he was willing to keep. Through the original series, we see him leaving the Saku to use things like the Gelog and other mobile suit units that, of course, had his iconic trait, paint red.
Right, because if you paint it red, he gets +3 speed, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Now
we had the Zaku 2 in Char specifically, and while Zeon was working on this, the Earth Federation was working on this bad boy. Tell me about this bad boy.
The RX 01, 02, and every other production model pretty much became one of these things where the second they have the RX 2, they realize they had something.
Right.
So the Federation went 4 or 5 different ways with it. One was, we need an improved version of this. This was mostly after they saw Amuro piloting it and hearing all the stories where they pretty much went like, whoa, new types might be a thing, and we need something that would be a little bit better for a new type. Quote to self, we're also going to start doing testing on new type orphans.
Right.
Not exactly.
That was much later, obviously.
Yes, but that started the thought in their minds.
Right, the idea started in their minds.
Yeah.
So speaking of working on new types and doing things, tell me about Lala.
Lala, well, depending on which source you take, you can take both, because technically
but
Origins
tell me
doesn't
about
really
who she
talk
was
about
in Origins. What happened with her?
This is where you have her backstory. Since the backstory was never animated, we usually take the backstory from the book over the backstory. Well, there really isn't a backstory for her besides that she had a poor family and she was picked up from these gambling that were using her ability to predict wins in games and stuff like that.
Correct.
But her actual background is a lot sadder than that. Now, in the books, there is a distinction of how Char meets her in comparison onto Origin, and the distinction is that Char meets her in a brothel, and in the book,
right.
Technically, she's being kept by the same people. It's just that the only difference is that she had been also being used for prostitution the entire time.
That I didn't know. That's interesting.
Yeah.
To know.
Now, another distinguishing factor is that she never does say this in Origin, but in the book she does explain that her family sold her in order to be able to feed the rest of her family.
Oh, we didn't get to know that. In Origins, she just explains that she chose to leave with these people because it would mean that she would be pretty much employed by them to send money to her family. Pretty
much. I mean, in the book, they kind of say the same thing, where it's like they sold her, and she understood why they did it, because they needed money to, and she was okay with it to save the rest of her family. Right. But she had a very horrible life. There's a whole backstory about like all the horrible things they did to her while in the brothel and stuff like that.
Right,
A
right,
quick
right.
tip is that there's actually some stuff there about like the Federation, and again, they're a bunch of assholes sometimes.
That's interesting.
Anyways,
Anyways, let's get on to Origins. And I'm gonna just play stuff in the background, but tell me about Origins and tell me about the beginning and how things played out.
well, it was already a very high tense political climate in Origins, especially in the beginning, because basically the all the colony groups were pretty much getting very, very tired of the Federation never hearing them out and never wanting to negotiate with them.
Right,
The Federation kept coming in when they did, pretty much being like, "Hey, remember who protects you? You know, you don't want to have to deal with things if the military no longer backs you and stuff," which didn't really work out for them. But it was at this point where Sendaku was getting a bunch of political like support. They wanted they loved his ideals, but at the same time they wanted him to do more. And that's where the savvy struck. Because they pretty much realized, hey, he's really not planning to start a war. He kind of just wants some kind of revolution, even if it's a smaller one. So they're like, no, we want a war. Because we want control of the colonies. So they pretty much pretended that they were like the rising faction, being like, oh, we will protect his ideals and we will fight for his ideals, whatever it is. Of course, the Rolohan family or the Rohan family, they knew that this was all bullshit and that they were pretty much the Savvy family was responsible for killing
Zendaikun.
Tendakum. So this kind of exploded into like a miniature family fight, which didn't last long because the Savvy family had taken years off screen, getting all this political support to the point that they almost immediately became leaders of the colony.
Right,
So their Roland's only choice was to kind of help the Sendaku's family and help them escape the colony, at least the children, because they knew the children could at least come back and one day claim their rightful place, right?
right,
So this was a big problem when Chrysilla decided to let go of Sendaku's son, because or Char. Well, the biggest problem with it was that she always had the mentality of like, they want me to kill them, but I don't really care for them. Plus,
right.
I like how he looks. Like I like his mentality. Maybe I can use him later. So that's why she really let him go, and it was something that backfired on her and everybody else badly after Origins.
Right.
But you know, so when they took control of the colonies, the Savvy family had a lot of power in very little time, which allowed them to start doing what they really wanted to do, which was start building a military, start a production of what basically became mobile suits or new weapons of war and everything else. And while they were doing all of this, you had Char Jr., like I like to call him, and Sayla pretty much running away for their lives. Their mother had to stay behind because she wouldn't have been able to go with them without the Savvy family putting their entire force into killing them.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, she still technically had some kind of political power. So she was dangerous at the moment. They weren't dangerous at all, as far as no one
No,
knew
they
they were
would
still
have
alive.
been if they were allowed to have stayed and lived and grown up.
Yes, yes. This is a lot of the guilt that Minerva later in life expresses through novels and such. That she felt like she was a princess that had stolen her palace,
Oh yeah, Princess
and
Minerva. Yeah.
yes, and she recalls a lot of what the Savvy family did to Sendeku and his family, and a lot of stuff.
Oh, and that's
There's
why in the Unicorn and in the narrative, Gundam narrative, the way she portrays herself, she tries to be this person for the people and understanding that Zeon comes with a bad reputation, so she tries to be more politically involved in a positive aspect to try to change that perspective from people. I'm guessing.
Yes, she does. It's to make up for a lot of damage that her family did. But
Correct.
at the end of the day, it's this the story of Origin is a story of Char growing into the person that he will become in the beginning of Gundam, and also to experience a little bit of the pain of himself, his family, and Sayla, and to see really how it was to run away from this powerful family who had even power in Earth. So you can really tell how strong the Savis were for by the time they got to original Gundam.
Right. Correct.
If there's one thing to take away out of Origin, and this is something that I got from one of my friends who doesn't really care for Gundam, but he watched this.
Correct.
Is that Origin is the perfect starting point to a story that you know is way deeper than just. It's a glimpse into a giant depth, and it's just the perfect amount of story to get you in. So, if anything else I would have to say about Origin is definitely a great starting point into the Gundam universe.
Right. 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 I completely agree. From somebody who started with Origins, I was immediately invested in the characters, specifically into the character of Char. So by the time we got to original Gundam, I had come in with a lot of knowledge that normally if you had just started with just regular Gundam, you'd be asking yourself questions left and right. Who is this Char person chasing after these people? Who is the Federation? Who is Zeon? What's happening? Why is he looking for revenge? This kind of tells you everything.
Yes, it definitely does. And it's a story that really develops from a small kind of like running away to come back and claim your throne to just this giant war in the background. It has a lot in common with a lot of ancient Chinese war stories. Where the prince leaves, they're gonna come back their kingdom. They're gonna come back for their kingdom later because they're in the middle of a giant war and so forth. But it's just the space opera of it just gives it a whole new level.
Right, of course. Yeah, most definitely agree.
Yes. Now the scenes that we're seeing now are basically of the mass estate, pretty much being attacked by a bunch of Zeon soldiers, and they're trying to kill Char at the time. And this really gives you a perspective of how strong the Savvy family was when you think about the fact that they had such an outreach to even try to do this to the Mass family, which at the time was a fairly big family in the Earth Federation.
Right.
So this really puts it in perspective.
Right.
The amount of
They were
stuff they
here
were able
to
to do.
execute Tiabolo Mass, and then of course the Guardians for Casval and Sayla, which they succeeded in one but not in the other.
Yes. Well, killing Tabula Mass was never really their main goal. It was just a benefit because he was an outstanding supporter of the Federation. So,
Right. Spoilers for people that care. We just got an introduction at Mirai. She's one of the main protagonists in the original Gundam, but you got to see some of the characters before they were on White Base and in regular Gundam and stuff.
Yes, and that's another really great thing about Origin, actually, that it was able to seamlessly kind of like just put in random characters that would become mainstays in the original show.
Right.
It'd just be like, here's a glimpse to one of them or another, and that's something just really great about the show.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, doing a rewatch now of Origins and seeing all of these characters that I've grown to love from original Gundam, from the perspective of somebody that would have already seen or original Gundam, this is also like amazing because even though you know all these characters, knowing where they came from is great.
Yes, it really does give you such a like such a fire to watch the rest of the series. It's definitely again a really great
Great. So
starting
this is
point.
why personally, this is a great starting point for people that haven't seen Gundam or don't know of Gundam, but also
Yes,
really good point for people that already know Gundam and already are fully caught up with everything. And seeing this come out is like a nice little treat for them as well.
yes. Whether we will get a Gundam remake or not, I still believe that this is basically the best we can get for now.
Right.
And
And then this scene coming up is when you see that Dr. Minovsky, when he was away from the Federation, he was in secret, working with Zeon.
pretty much. At the time, the Federation didn't really see mobile suits as the future, but thanks to Minorski, he changed that train of thought pretty goddamn fast.
Right.
Now, what you have to say about this is that the Savage family's biggest advantage was the amount of military leaders that were living in colonies that were pretty much okay with joining them. Because that really helped them immediately impact the war.
This is the mobile worker one. This is their first design that they were working on.
Yeah, well, the mole worker has been a staple for
Correct,
the
correct. But
colonies
this is
for a
the
while
first
now.
time that they were mobilizing it for war, and this
Yeah,
is them working on an idea on how to advance their warfare technology as opposed to the Earth Federation that already had a big military. They didn't need to worry about anything.
yes, yes, yes. So, I mean, I don't feel that there's much more to cover when it comes to Origins. I think we covered pretty much everything of it, besides like the start of the 1 Year War, which I feel is pretty self-explanatory. If anything, the series helps build tension for what will become a very wild ride. Gundam isn't able to really give you an in-depth into what started the war, and this series does just that. So, if anything, this is a great starting point into the Universal Century, and definitely a great show just to watch. I guarantee, even if you don't want to get into Gundam, give this show a watch, and if anything, it'll at least pique your interest.
Right, definitely piqued my interest. I had nothing whatsoever that I wanted to do with Gundam, and then immediately watched this, and that's all I wanted. All I wanted was Gundam.
Yes.
And then again, covering again one of those special moments where we get to know certain characters early on. This was the first introduction of Amuro Ray, which was the main protagonist of original Gundam. We get to see what kind of character and person he was prior to piloting the original RX-78-2.
Yes, this is literally the days away from the start of original Gundam, or actually not days away, but
I want to say
a
this is like
couple
month. This is
years away,
like years or a few years away.
a,
Yeah,
a year or two away. Yeah,
right.
maybe months. I'm not entirely
Yeah,
sure
because
what they
this is them when
they
they were
quoted.
arriving on Site 7, and then they weren't completely done with all of their projects yet and
No,
everything.
that's side three.
Is it Site 3?
Yeah, I think they're in side three.
Oh, alright, well, I don't know. I've thrown Site 7 a lot like crazy. Maybe because
Yeah.
something happens in Site 7
Wait,
later on.
wait, wait, wait. No, yeah. You know what it is? We got them messed up. Side three is where the Zeon faction is, and
Right,
side
and Site
seven is.
7 is where Amuro Ray and his father, that's where they live.
Yes, 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 yes.
And then
Well,
one of the greatest scenes that I got to see from Origins, to be fair, is actually this one.
at this point, he knew that his only way of getting revenge on the rest of the Savage family was to get them to become an important soldier for them. And so he knew that doing this mission, hunting down the Pegasus, or whatever you want to call it, they knew that this was the mission that he was gonna claim glory for. If only he knew, you know, everything else that this would lead into.
Right, obviously. See, that was Admiral Revel escaping, and then
Yeah.
this was the scene where Char says political theater type thing.
Well, it's important because Admiral Rebel had such a big impact into warfare for for everybody in the Federation that without him, it's not unfair to think that they didn't really have a chance of winning.
Why though? Admiral Revel is just one admiral.
He was one of the few political leaders of the Federation that actually managed to push everybody together. You got to take into consideration that once the RX-78 was finished and all the other military groups were able to see what it was capable of doing, they all started developing their own version of the suit in one way or another. They had their own reasons not to necessarily help a lot. You know how in the Savvy family during the 1 Year War, you saw a lot between Chrysilla and Giren, where they would kind of do this little, I'll send a little bit of support your way, but I won't really send that much help.
Right, obviously.
And back and forth. That is what really caused the downfall of the Savvy family, because they had this competition in the middle of the whole thing. Really, if they didn't even have that fight, maybe Garma Savvy would have survived. Who knows? Unlikely, but,
Right.
there could have been major changes. Now, he was able to kind of put the Federation into one track line and tell them, hey, you all have your own reasons for doing shit, but just make sure you help with the war effort, at least a little bit. And that helped a lot.
Right. And then this scene right here, when Admiral Revel intervenes on the quote unquote peace talks between Zeons and the Earth Federation.
At that time, Zeon was pretty much kind of just telling them, hey, we're going to declare independence and we're going to start claiming some land from you guys.
Right.
Like, it was peace talks, but they were heavily sided towards Zeon. So that's why he needed to interfere, because he knew the rest of the Federation would have to do something in order to save face.
Correct.
The Federation has never been beneath lowering themselves to the Zeons. It's just that everybody has their own political reason into why they do certain things.
Right, obviously.
Yes. An example, it's one of the leaders you got to see now. But yes. Now I'm gonna talk a little bit more before we end this about some fun information that many people may not or may do know about things. This is after reviewing some books, reviewing some history, and some other stuff. I got to know something very interesting.
Yeah.
One of them is that Glemy Toto from Davos Zeta is related to the Savis.
How is Glemy Toto related to the Zabis?
He's actually the adopted son of an artisan from the Toto family, who was supposedly the illegitimate sire by Giren. So he is the illegitimate son of Giren. Well,
and then look, this is exactly what happened right at the end. When you get to see a Moray, and then you saw his caption saying he would be.
You get to see the Zeon invading forces land on Earth and start taking control. But yeah, let me go back to the Gleaming Toto thing before I forget.
Right.
So yes, he's the illegitimate son of the Savi family. And then, of course, you get Alicia Savi and Gloria Savi, which are remnant survivors of Titan. And not exactly sure how they relate to the Savis.
Correct.
Not exactly very explained. But they start a new nation on Mars, which, according to the logic, would mean that it's very likely that their new foundation of Red Zeon will eventually become the Empire and other things that will become relevant and F-91, and then Victory, and later on, and so forth.
Correct. And coming back around now to Origins, as you stated before when I was watching this, and it ended up being true, is that Origins, literally mere hours after the ending of Origins, if you were following chronologically, the original Gundam would begin. This scene that you're seeing here now is of Pegasus class White Base landing on the colony, and the scene right after it is the beginning of original Gundam, where you see Char and his Zaku in hot pursuit trying to steal the secret project that the Federation was working on, that at the time they knew very little about. Then we just saw our boy Bright Noah right before he took leadership of White Base. So this was him early on. Alrighty, guys. Well, we don't want to bore you any longer than we already have, and we don't want to make this any longer than it is. But this is a successful mission, and this is a Gundam prototype taking off.